Hey YouTube, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. XCL SCX24, FMS, FCX24, Servo test. The SCX24, most popular microcrawler probably, or for sure, one of the first things people normally upgrade is the servo. It comes with a tiny plastic geared servo. And the FCX24 does come with a much better, probably, metal gear servo, but nobody knows the specifications of those servos. I didn't find them. And in this video, I will test the SCX24 stock servo, the FCX24 stock servo, and 9 upgrade servos, including the super popular Emax servos in analog and digital versions, and including 2 killer servos, which probably can destroy your SCX24 or your truck. The BEC of the SCX24 does have 5 volts and probably 1 or 0.8 amperes, and the BEC of the FCX24 does have 6 volts and 1 ampere. So I will test all servos with 5 volts, what's in the SCX24, and with 6 volts, what's in the FCX24, and the killer high voltage servos I will additionally test on 8.4 volt, what's a full 2S LiPo battery. I will test torque, amp draw and speed of all servos. For torque tests and amp draw measurements, I will use my trusty old servo test setup, which I adapted to make it possible to test micro servos too, and it works surprisingly well. So I will read the measurements in kilogram from this luggage scale and the amp draw from my lab power supply, which will power up the servos. I can adjust it for 5 volts, 6 volts, 8.4 volts. And of course, I used servo arms where the distance between the arm here and the center is exactly 1 centimeter, what was quite an effort in some servos, mainly in the FCX24 servo. There are a ton of different servo arms and ground sizes. That's quite a pain in those small micro servos. And testing speed. In my servo tests of standard servos 1 or 2 years ago, a lot of you asked, why don't you measure the speed of the servos? That's quite difficult, and I thought a lot, but I found a way. So what did I do? I glued this long needle to the different servo arms. I use my FlySky Noble for moving the servo, but not on the channel 1 steering, on a push button, so 100%. And I used my GoPro 240 frames per second and filmed the movement. I made this graph, and that's a line of exactly 60 degrees. You will see it when I'm doing the measurements. I had to place, this was glued, the box, the servo as near the tip of the needle as near as possible, but not touching to this piece of paper. And then, and with DaVinci Resolve, I counted the frames from starting here to here, and that way I calculated the speed time for 60 degrees, what's this distance. I have to admit 500 frames per second would have been better, but it worked surprisingly well. So let's start testing. I will begin with the SCX24 stock servo and the FCX24 stock servo, and then show you all the other servos I chose, show you the factory specifications, do the measurements and compare them to the factory specifications. And after all those tests, I will compare all servos, torque, amp draw and speed. And I will test all servos at 5 volts, at 6 volts, and the high voltage servos also at 8.4 volts. Let's start with the SCX24 servo. There are no specifications. It is super light, 5.6 grams only, and it has plastic gears only. So let's test torque and amp draw at 5 volts now. And now at 6 volts. And here are the results of the SCX24 servo at 5 volts. Best drive was 0.76 kilograms centimeter, watts 10.6 ounces inch. And at 6 volts, 0.86 kilograms centimeter, watts 11.9 ounces inch. And the amp draw was 0.47 at 5 volts and 0.23 only at 6 volts. So that's super strange. I don't know a reason for this, why the SCX24 servo drew less amps at 6 volts than it did at 5 volts. All the other servos but one did not. And now let's test the speed of the SCX24 servo. And here again the results. At 5 volts I counted 20 frames, what means 0.083 seconds for 60 degree. And at 6 volts I counted 17 frames, what's 0.071 seconds for 60 degree. And now to the FCX24 servo. This has metal gears. The weight is 12.5 grams. And now let's test its torque at 5 volts. And now at 6 volts. And we see the FCX24 servo is much stronger than the SCX24 servo. It could pull 5.26 kilograms at 5 volts, what's 73 ounces inch, kilograms centimeter, and at 6 volts even 5.88 kilograms centimeter, what's 81.7 ounces inch. So that's really good. And the amp draw was also much higher. Don't forget, it has a BSC with only 1 amp, so it pulled at 5 volts 0.93 amps, but it runs on 6 volts and it pulled 1.03 amps at 6 volts. So that's the maximum the BSC should be able to deliver, at least factory says this. And now let's also check the speed of the FCX24 servo at 5 volts. And at 6 volts. At 5 volts I counted 37 frames, what means 0.154 seconds for 60 degree, and at 6 volts 33 frames, 0.138 seconds for 60 degree. So it's much slower than the super light plastic gear SCX24 servo. However, speed is not super important in a crawler. And now let's start with the test of the upgrades or third-party servos. But before I will test the Emax servos, analog and digital, I know all of you want to see those. I want to show you this little servo, the AFRC D1802MG. You can also buy it with normal servo plugs. I bought it with micro plugs because I use a lot of those micro receivers, and that's the only servo in the test that does have exactly the same dimensions as the SCX24 stock servo, maybe even the same case. This means that's the only servo in the test that will fit without any problems into the stock SCX24 servo mount. If you want a simple upgrade with no modifications at all, then this servo is the servo you should choose. In contrary to the SCX24 servo, it does have nicely greased metal gears. However, pinion and one gear are made out of plastic, and you can see the stock specifications here. It should perform better than the SCX24 servo, so it should be significantly stronger, and it should be about as fast as the already super fast SCX24 servo. So let's do the tests and see if it's as good as factory specifications say. Let's test at 5 and 6 volts, torque, amp draw, and speed. And here are the results of the AFRC D1802MG, and we see 1.32 kilogram centimeter, 18.3 ounces inch at 5 volts. That's much better than the stock specifications and much better than the SCX24 stock servo, and the same at 6 volts, 1.44 kilogram centimeter, 20 ounces inch at 6 volts, again much better than the stock specifications. So that's a big surprise, and of course also much better than the SCX24 stock servo. And speed, 0.1 seconds for 60 degree at 5 volts, that's slower than specifications, and at 6 volts 0.075 seconds for 60 degrees, that's nearly specifications. So thumbs up for this servo. So the AFRC servo is already an upgrade for your SCX24 and fits to the stock servo mount perfectly. And now to the probably most popular servos and to the eldest servos I use for many years now for upgrading small cars and trucks. Those are the Emax servos and also the Tower Pro MG90S super cheap servo. But first to the Emax servos. That's the Emax ES08MD and MA2. That's the analog version, which is a little bit cheaper, and the digital version. And years ago there was a MD without 2. I do also have some of those. First of all, prices seem to have increased extremely if they are sold now by normal shops. I have only few of the analog, I don't know, I guess 2 where I bought them from or why. I normally buy the digital versions, and I guarantee you I do have more than 15 of those for sure. I did not pay more than $10 for each of those. Most cheaper. There are always promotions, and actually they are sold on many places for about $20. Last time I bought them was about 1 year ago. I bought a pack of 6 from a Banggood European warehouse for I guess 46 or 48 euros including shipment, so about 8 euros for a servo. So search a little bit, you will always find promotions, mainly in multi-packs, and $20 is rather expensive. And what's super interesting is that the analog version and the digital version do have the exact same specifications. There seems to be no difference. So my test now will show if there is any difference. And these Emax servos are the only servos in the test, but the further Emax servo I will test later, which are super wide, so this distance here, so they won't fit to the stock SCX24 servo mount easily. The length here is the problem, and that's why there are many options. You can modify the stock servo mount, you can print out servo mounts, and of course you can buy those Emax servo mounts. All the other servos tested, but this Emax servo are a little bit less wide here and will fit from width into the stock mount, but there are other problems. Both of the servos do not only share the same case, but they both do have nicely greased metal gears, so there's no difference either. And yeah, I'm interested too if those are different in any way. This analog one, I guess I cut those. Yeah, that's not original. And there should be fake Emax servos around. I assume all mine are original, genuine Emax servos because all of those came in those boxes. Analog, digital. So let's check them and see if there is any difference. It seems most people buy the analog ones for the SCX24. And of course I changed the settings in the speed test in my FlySky Noble to analog. That's important. If you use the analog servo with servo settings digital, it doesn't work properly, and in digital for the digital one. So let's check how they work, if there's any difference. So the analog Emax at 5 volts and the digital Emax torque at 5 volts. And the analog Emax at 6 volts torque measurement. And the digital Emax 6 volts torque. Speed measurement, the analog Emax at 5 volts and the digital Emax at 5 volts, the analog servo at 6 volts and the digital at 6 volts. And here are the results of the two Emax servos, the MA analog and the MD digital, and also stock specifications. Stock specifications are given for 4.8 volts and 6 volts. What do we see? Torque measurements. Both servos are much stronger than stock specifications say, really much stronger. At 5 volts compared to 4.8 volts, but also at 6 volts compared to 6 volts. So that's a surprise. Many servos seem to be much stronger in the micro servo test than the stock specifications say. In my standard servo tests some time ago this was not the case, but they are a little bit slower than stock specifications say, or they are slower, significantly slower. And is there any difference between MA2 and MD2, so the analog and the digital version? In torque tests, not really. A little bit, maybe the digital version is a little bit stronger, but I did test only one servo of both types, so nearly the same torque, a little bit stronger and a little bit faster, the digital version. But there is a difference, a significant difference. Check the amp draw. The digital servo does draw really significantly less ampere than the analog version at 5 volts and at 6 volts. So there is a difference, because those BECs of those tiny trucks are weak with 1 amp, and the analog servo seems to pull nearly 1 amp, 0.9, 0.8 at 5 volts and about 1 amp at 6 volts, while the digital Emax ES08 only pulls 0.7, 0.66 at 5 volts and 0.79, 75, 73 at 6 volts. So this is a significant difference, and so that digital version is the preferable one. So MAMD, take the digital version of the Emax if you can get it, and if it's not significantly more expensive. And the next servo, the super popular and super old Pro MG90S. There are tons of copies of those servos out there. They are already available for a long time, and I have used them a lot for example, Bash Rockstar and similar trucks. It has metal gears, full metal gears, but they are not greased, and it's not as wide as the Emax servos, so it will fit into the stock SCX24 servo mount, but it's too high, as you know, so you have to adapt, modify the servo mount, or buy a special servo mount, the Mofo best servo mount in the world, or whatever, if you want to use it. It's super cheap. I guess I bought some for $2 in this area, and let's see if this servo also exceeds its stock specifications. So here the results of the Pro MG90S servo, the first servo that's weaker and lower performing than stock specifications say. At 5 volts it's weaker than stock specifications say at 4.8 volt, significantly weaker, and it's also slower. However, it is a quite fast servo, so weak servos seem to be fast at 6 volts, 0.088, but not enough torque for a really good upgrade microcrawler servo. So unfortunately not as good as specifications promise, not recommended, but super mega cheap, and it works in toy trucks, so a nice servo. And the next servo I will test is the Savöx SH0261MG. Those are also super popular. You see, I changed the servo wires. I have them already for, I guess, nearly 10 years, 8-9 years. I bought them as helicopters washblade servos. They are not really good. They are cheap, even available in local hobby shops here, $20, 15, 20, 25. And full metal gears, also not as wide as the Emax servos, so you could, with a little bit of effort, get it into the stock SCX24 servo mount. It's also a little bit too long with some shims, or with a new special servo mount. And let's check this servo and see if this is better than its specifications say. And here are the results of the Savöx SH0261MG. Again, this servo is also stronger than stock specifications say, and it's a little bit slower. At 6 volts it's quite fast, at 5 volts it's significantly slower than stock specifications say, and it doesn't draw a lot of amp. And the next servo in the test, again an Emax servo, the ES3059MD. This servo has the exact same dimensions as the previously tested Emax servos. Same case probably, so it won't fit easily into the SCX24 stock servo mount. Of course, it will fit into the Emax servo mount. It has metal gears promised, but the gears are not fully metal. There are also some plastic gears, however they are nicely greased. Let's check it, and let's check if it also will exceed its stock specifications. So here the results of the Emax ES3059MD, and this servo also highly exceeds its stock specifications, and it's even stronger than the other Emax servos tested in this test. And what's interesting in this servo, there seems to be nearly no difference in ampere draw between 5 volts and 6 volts. Even the highest amp draw I measured or found was at 5 volts, so that's quite interesting and quite a good performance, really strong, but not fully metal gears. And the next servo in the test is the Surpass S0009M. It's not as wide as the Emax servos, so again, with a little bit of effort, it will fit into the stock SCX24 servo mount. Again, it's too high, needs modifications. It has full metal gears, and it's made for tiny trucks and tiny cars. So let's test it and see how it performs. And here are the results of the Surpass S0009M servo. Again, much stronger than stock specifications say. 5 volts, nearly 4 kilograms centimeter, really strong. 4.8 volts stock specifications less than 2 kilograms. And at 6 volts, 4.7 kilograms centimeter, 65 ounces inch. That's really strong and way more than stock specifications say. But it's, as many of the other servos, significantly slower. And amp draw is quite high in this servo. Check it out, more than 1 amp at 6 volts, so that's quite a lot, similar to the FCX24 servo. And now to the first of the two killer servos. I will test the high voltage servos that maybe can destroy your SCX24. That's the Votik PTK 9497MGD servo. All those metal case servos have open sides, like this one where you can see the motor, so for sure not waterproof at all. Many of those have stickers on the side, and initially those are Haley swashblade and Haley tail servos. for 450 and 300 helicopters around for about 10 years or more. All those with metal case have around 20 grams, and the plastic case servos with the same size, normally they are not as high, do then have between 13 and 17 grams. I will test this servo at 5 volts, 6 volts and 8.4 volts. Check the stock specifications. Fast and very strong, and we will see if this servo also exceeds its stock specifications. And of course, this servo or those servos do all have full metal gears and bearings. So let's start the test. And now also at 8.4 volt, what's a full 2S LiPo battery. And 8.4 volts. And here are the results of the Votik servo. The stock specifications are given for 7.4 volts, not for 8.4 volts. However, check the results. Torque much stronger than stock specifications say. At a full 2S LiPo, 8.4 volt, nearly 11 kilograms centimeter, more than 150 ounces inch. That's super strong. And the servo is also really fast. Nearly stock specifications. But at 8.4 volts it's even faster than stock specifications say at 7.4 volts. So a super servo, but check the amperage draw. More than 2 amps, highest amp draw at 2S 8.4 volts. So that's quite a lot. And also at 5 and 6 volts, more than 1 amp, 1.3 amps, 1.5 amps. So probably too much for a stock SCX24 unit and also for a stock FCX24 unit. So wow, what a result. Wow, what amperage draw. And the next servo, the GDW DS296X, should be at least as good as the Votik servo. I will talk a little bit about those metal servos and extremely expensive ones after all the tests. But of course you can run those 8.4 volt servos if you really want this torque in your tiny truck directly from your 2S LiPo, only from a 2S LiPo. Then there is no problem with the BEC of the SCX24 or the FCX24. I guess most of you know how to do this. For those who do not, quick explanation, you have to make a Y cable from your LiPo battery, only 2S. One goes normally to your receiver unit or ESC or BEC in your SCX24 and FCX24 to the receiver ESC unit, and the other cable goes directly to the servo, of course only to the red and the black, or here brown, that's brown too, wire to plus and minus. And what's super important, you have to make one Y cable here, only to the black or brown, to the minus, and you have to remove the red wire from the servo plug. So the servo plug goes normally to your receiver ESC unit, but only with white or yellow and black or brown, so signal and minus GNU. The red one, you have to remove it. That's super important. And you run the red one directly to the battery, and you make a Y connection a Y cable from the black or brown one from the minus to the battery. So the servo goes to the receiver unit and 2 wires go directly to your LiPo. That way the servo is directly powered by your LiPo, 2S LiPo, and there will be no problem with the BEC of your truck. But don't forget to disconnect after running the battery from the units, because otherwise, even if you switch off your truck, the servo will be still under power. And now to this GDW servo. Of course, also full metal gears, ball bearings, top quality. Check the specifications, super promising, and let's test it. Wow, did you see this? I tested a further new servo arm after I broke this servo arm, but I didn't film it. It broke immediately, even with a super nice pop, super fast. And finally, I used the servo arm that came with the servo, a stronger one, and did the test on 8.4 volts. And here the results of the GDW DS296X. This servo exceeds factory specification in all matters, so in torque and also in speed. Check this out. Factory specifications are given for 6 volts and 8.4 volts, and it's even faster and much stronger. Draws a lot of amps, of course. However, absolutely fantastic results. Servos that are better than factory says. Wow, what a result. Now you know why I call those servos killer servos. And I will talk about further servos I could have tested. I do have a lot more after the comparison. First, let's compare all results of all servos in 5 and 6 volt, torque, speed and amp draw. That's probably the most interesting part of this video. So here we have all 11 servos tested, from the weakest one, the SCX24 stock servo, up to the strongest one, the GDW servo, at 5 volts and at 6 volts torque. The lower bar is 5 volts and the upper bar is 6 volts. What do we see? The FCX24 stock servo is super strong. The strongest servo of all normal servos tested. Only the 2 metal case servos, high voltage servos, are stronger, also at 6 and 5 volts. In fact, they are much stronger. And the Emax ES08MD and MA are medium. They are a big upgrade for the SCX24, but not for the FCX24. And even the tiny AFRC, which has the same dimensions as the SCX24 stock servo, is already an upgrade, a significant upgrade to the stock servo in the SCX24. The Tower Pro, the cheapo, not really good. The Savöx, if you have some, they are an upgrade for the SCX24. And the Surpass servo was the strongest of the normal servos tested, but for an FCX24 you do not need an upgrade servo if you don't want to go to the killer servos. But amp draw is not unimportant. So here you see the amperage draw of all servos, again from the weakest one to the strongest one. Again, lower bar 5 volts, upper bar 6 volts, very strange in the SCX24. Less amperage draw at 6 volts than at 5 volts. And this red line indicates 1 ampere, so that's the specification of the FCX24 BEC and probably also of the SCX24 1 amp or 0.8 amp. And you see that at 6 volts in the FCX24, the stock servo is already at 1 amp draw. Also the Surpass and the analog Emax, you won't use it in the FCX24 anyway. And at 5 volts, what's the SCX24 BEC? You can use all those servos, the Surpass and the analog Emax draw most amps, but probably okay still for the SCX24 stock BEC. And for the FCX24, all those servos aren't an upgrade anyway. And if you want to go to the full metal helicopter plane servos, which are super strong, you have to test how strong the FCX24 BEC is, but probably it's better to use an external BEC or directly power the servo from your 2S LiPo, but then there is the danger of breaking something. And finally, speed. Here again, from the weakest to the strongest servos, 5 volts, 6 volts. It seems that the weaker servos are faster than the stronger servos. That's obvious here on this graph. The SCX24 stock servo is the fastest of all at 5 volts and at 6 volts. And although the tiny AFRC servo is really fast, all the other servos around in the same area at 5 and 6 volts. The analog Emax is a little bit slower than the digital one. The Surpass is quite okay and quite fast too. And the stock FCX24 servo is the slowest of all servos tested. However, speed is not that important in a crawler or in a microcrawler for the servo, and it's not much slower. Okay, it's even faster than the Emax, the analog Emax at 5 volt, but 6 volts is what you give your servo in the FCX24, and at 6 volts it's the slowest of all. And the high voltage servos at 5 and 6 volts, they are not much faster than the normal servos, but if you power them up with the 2S LiPo 8.4 volts, you have seen the results. When I tested those servos, they are then a little bit faster. So that's it for this video, nearly. What did we learn? The AS1, the SCX24 stock servo, is super poor, and nearly every other servo is an upgrade for the SCX24 stock servo, not for the FMS FCX24 servo. This is a top servo compared to other normal servos, super strong, so only really strong and fast full metal case, more expensive servos are really an upgrade for the FCX24. However, maybe you know those servos. Those are also from FMS and do have exactly the same case. Those are from the 1 to 12. That's from the 1 to 12, the wheel is cheap. But those are not the same servos as the FCX24 servo. They do have plastic gears, so they are no spare part for the FCX24. If you get the Emax, analog or digital, take the digital one. It's a little bit better, draws less amp, and don't pay too much. In my opinion, SCX24 tuners or fans are constantly ripped off. Everybody who's already longer in the micros or also in helis knows this. Prices have increased extremely. because the SCX24 is that popular. When you saw my motor test video, it's the same now. Suddenly, after the SCX24 has been released and such a big success, prices increased extremely. You don't have to pay more than about 10 bucks. 20 bucks is too much for a Emax servo. You get it much cheaper. And also with all the other things, you see it, for example, there are now Injora servos. Injora never made servos, of course. They do not produce servos. I like Injora. I buy a lot of their parts, super, but they now sell a servo because there's a lot of money. And there's a Morpho servo and, most ridiculous, a CCX RC servo for the SCX24. What's that? They even do not fit to the stock SCX24 battery mount. So no specifications, but probably a lot of money because people buy and pay 20 bucks or whatever for such a servo. You get the nice upgrade servo for less than 10 bucks. I can tell you this, and I know it. And if you want to go with the killer servos, that's the same thing. Some people seem to think those servos have been developed for the SCX24. Those are around for a long time. For 10 years, I guess. I bought the first ones probably around 10 years ago of those metal case 20 gram micro servos for helicopters, and it's absolutely not necessary to buy a 100 bucks servo for a micro crawler. I showed you this Votik servo in the beginning. I even don't know its name anymore. At 6 volts, 10 kilograms, I guess. I didn't test it or use it in the tests because I guess it's not available anymore. I bought 4 of those, 3 for the swash plate and the blue one for the tail servo for a helicopter in, guess, 2013 or 14 for my Gaui X3. But those are super bad in the helicopters. They are no good servos. However, for a micro truck or for a truck, they are totally okay. I exchanged those servos and bought really good servos in my Gaui. I don't have my Gaui anymore, but the same as in this helicopter. That's my beloved Oxy 3. You see, those are BK servos and MKS servos, but those servos, they are nearly 100 bucks or 80 bucks. When did I build this? In 2015, I guess. So 350 euros at least for the servos already 7 years ago. But they pay off in a helicopter, in a 3D helicopter, and also maybe probably in a plane, maybe even in a fast racer, but not in a crawler. Those servos, much better. I had the same ones in the Gaui than those Votiks, but one of those servos is the price of 4 of those. In a helicopter, you want centering perfect, super fast and super sensitive, and they pay off. This heli does have more than 1,000 flights now with the same 4 servos, MKS and 2 and 3 BK. And if you buy a heli servo, never buy a tail servo. If you buy it for your RC truck, always buy the swash plate servos. The tail servos are super fast. I guess this is 0.02 or something, or 3, and not that strong. And the swash plate servos are still super fast, but they are stronger. So if you want to spend 100 bucks, because there are now truck micro servos for 100 bucks, in my opinion, that's a totally waste of money. I could use this super beloved BK servo in my FCX or SCX24, and I could use this super bad Votik servo. Maybe that's even stronger. I didn't measure the BK servos, but I wouldn't see or feel any difference, because what do? We are crawling super slow. People buy 100 bucks to make their SCX24 super slow with the FuriTech ESC and motors, and then they want super fast servos. It's not necessary. Also centering in the truck, in the crawler, we always have the steering wheels and move it all the time. And in a plane, that's totally different. It has to perfectly center, super fast, nice, and even more in a helicopter, in a tail servo, super important, but not in such a tiny toy truck, which crawls super slow. So do yourself a favor. if you want to buy one of those killer servos, then don't pay 100. You can get a super good killer servo already for 20 bucks or less. This Votik, I bought the first one, I guess 2 years ago, high voltage servo, around 20 bucks, but they are actually even much cheaper. If you buy a pack of 4, you get them for, I guess, 62 euros, including shipping actually. So crazy prices. You get for 20 bucks. Also, you get Turnigy or whatever cheap servo brands, and those are in a crawler as good as the most expensive ones. There are also those purple ones, I don't know, AOL or whatever, what everyone needs now. They are probably okay. I don't have one of the larger ones. But I heard a YouTuber say, oh, this servo is probably a copy of the Reeves 99. Man, no. Those servos are around much longer. If then the Reeves is a copy, I don't know, but I wouldn't pay 100 bucks for a micro servo. You have absolutely the same result. This servo is also cheap, a little bit more expensive. I guess I paid 27 or whatever, and mostly it's around 40. And I guarantee you that's not worse. And you have to think, all those servos do have open motors. So they are not waterproof for sure. And then you will ask me, why did I not test any waterproof servos? There would be one, also micro servo size. I should also explain servo sizes. There is not a real system, but you have micro servos, super micro servos, nano servos, midi servos, and standard servos. The standard servos are normally those ones we use in the 1/10th trucks. The midi servos are those ones. You also get them for small helicopters or micro helicopters as tail servo, but that's a car servo. So about that size, and that's the micro size, those and those. And the SCX24 is maybe already super micro, I don't know. There is no real border, but that's probably super micro. And then we have the nano servos. Those are those 1.7 gram servos and 2 gram servos. And micro servos are those ones that are already a little bit too large for the SCX24. However, that's the JX PDI HV1151MG, and normally you would say this is a perfect servo. Normally you would say this is a perfect servo for upgrading your micro trucks because it's waterproof and it's high voltage and it's super strong. It's a shifting servo for the TRX4. The problem is why I did not test it. At least you have big problems to mount this in the SCX24. It has very strange tabs, but more important, it has a super strange and super large crown. And you will have problems to find any servo arm that will fit to this servo. I have around 30 or more different servos in micro size, and I didn't find any servo arm that fitted because it's huge. So you could use the stock servo arm that comes with it, 3 to come with it, but those openings are large, and the SCX24 1.4mm servos are too large for those openings. So you will have problems. Maybe this would be an upgrade servo for the FCX24. Will probably fit quite nicely and is waterproof, but I didn't use it in those tests now because 11 servos is already enough, too much. I could have tested 15 servos more. There are further servos like those super micro, that's a killer servo, the AFRC micro. This is called micro, but that's for sure super micro. That's normally for a mini set, and a killer servo, and I will use it in my light build SCX24, but I don't see any sense testing it here because that's super expensive, 60-70 bucks. Nobody will use it, maybe I. And there are many more of those super micro servos you could probably use. Most of those Haley servos, cheap ones for a few bucks, and as you have seen with this servo, nearly everything is an upgrade for the SCX24. You would have to test. I had to reduce the number of servos tested. Super nice. The Link servos, Haley servos, for sure good servos for an SCX24 if you don't use too much weight. But there would be so many I think I used the most popular ones. I for sure will not buy Injora servo, even if I buy a lot from Injora, and for sure not the Morpho servo, and for sure not the XRC servo. I won't pay more than $10 for my normal servos, and I won't pay more than around 20, 25, $15 for the super killer servos, because it's not necessary. That's it, guys. I hope this video helps to choose the right upgrade servo for your SCX24 and the FCX24. And if you want, buy $100 servos for your SCX24, but you won't be better, or your SCX24 won't be better than a further SCX24 with a further killer servo, which was only 20, 15, 16, $30. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope to see you in the next video. I'll be back.